Welcome back to the podcast. We're sorry we're a few days late. Perspectives podcast here. My name is Bruce. I've got Deborah. Hello, Deborah.
Hello.
We have been sick the last few days, so we have been trying to upload once a week, but Deb has COVID. Surprise, fourth time.
Fourth, fifth.
Whatever COVID means anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But thankfully, it was just a day or two, high fever, house gone to pot. I did my best. I also wasn't feeling well, but thank you for returning. If you've been listening over the past few weeks, we're going to continue the parenting series. I was telling Deb, boy, there's so many other things going on. It seems strange to talk about parenting with the war, nuclear escalation, all that's happening inside Ukraine as well. And I was thinking maybe to do just a podcast on our perspective as we're not just watching the news, but listening to podcasts, friends, and even inside Russia, the perspective, such different narratives from inside the East versus West.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But just know if you are in Ukraine and listening, that our hearts are with you. So we started this series with pregnancy, and Deborah had some really good things to share there. So if you haven't heard that and that's of interest to you, go back and take a listen. And then we moved into the first 3 years. That was the last podcast, my favorite. And then we're moving into the, what would you call the 4 to 10-year-olds? We've got an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old in this sphere still. So it's fresh for us. And we actually tried to have them on the podcast just a few minutes ago, and it didn't go very well.
Didn't go so well.
No, Claire got nervous, and then Abby said some things that we need to deal with. we realized
not on the podcast.
We have some issues to work on after the podcast. So thanks for joining. And Deb, you feel up to this?
I feel okay for now, yeah.
Okay, so let's move right into the 4 to 10-year-olds. We talked about in the last podcast that we wouldn't be so focused if we could go back on just the outward obedience, like getting the results, the actions, without really focusing on the heart. I think we thought we were focusing on the heart. Mm-hmm. And as first-time parents, we're so focused and actually delighted too. Like, wow, they obeyed. They're doing what they're told. And then we kind of panic when they don't. And then we discipline to try and get that outward obedience. And we think that's the success. Mm-hmm. But truly, it is the inward relationship and that you're developing over time and getting to their heart. That was a teaching that we got early on, is that you're trying to parent and train not to get just outward obedience, but to come inside their hearts and come alongside them in their development.
Mm-hmm. And obedience, first-time obedience is important when they're young and toddlers, and they need to listen to you because you are wise.
You are wise, parents. You have much more knowledge, so never apologize for requiring that first-time obedience. When they're little, they have no negotiation skills.
It's easy to stay in that mode of, because I said so, because I told you, when as they're moving into these next years, they start to gain comprehension between what you say and what you do.
Right. And I had just said they don't have negotiating skills. No, that was incorrect. They do have the skills. They don't have the right. They haven't earned the right through maturity. And we talked about the parenting funnel as well. That, like you're saying at the beginning, you're requiring that first-time obedience. They have very little freedom. But as they grow and mature and show themselves to be responsible and be able to manage the freedoms we give them, then the goal is to widen their freedoms. And so we're into the age now, 4 to 10, where what can we do instead of just requiring outward obedience? There's a point where you actually have to explain why. Why is it important to obey? Why Daddy says don't run over the flower bed? Why is it important not to take that candy from the store? The moral reason why.
I think it's interesting as we went through this process and heard this teaching, moral reason why, that I felt even I was bankrupt on some of this theology about why we require obedience and why this is good for us to do.
Yeah, I remember hearing just the concept that as children, they're coming into this world kind of with a not bankrupt, but an empty warehouse of morals, of ethics, and so they're going to pick it up vicariously as they watch you. But as a young 4, 5, 6-year-old, you also need not just embody it, but also verbally. Now we're communicating. Whereas before, they got sign language, they're not making a lot of sense, but now there's some dialogue taking place. So you're, I think, embodying the virtues that you have and then like kind of paving them with words versus just do what I say because I'm your parent. So many of our ideas about authority are so negative because we revert to roles and not relationship. I am the dad. Therefore, obey me. I don't need to talk about it. I'm the mom because I said so. That's you're calling to your role instead of appealing to a virtue.
Yeah, it's the great thing about having kids now. You have this intense spotlight almost on you and your life about why you're doing the things you're doing, and does your behavior follow your beliefs? And they are the ones that know because they're close and they can see.
They may not confront it, but they see it.
Yes, they're picking up on all these little
inconsistencies.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're trying to create rhythms as a young mom or dad, the baby, or into the toddler years, we need to be consistent, even if that means we're not able to uphold like some standard, to pull back and just be consistent with who you are, really, not who you're trying to be as a mom or a dad. So you're entering the years where they will really help you process and start to learn about yourself.
Mm-hmm. And I think in that consistency, like we know we're not always going to be that way and we are going to fail. And that actually those failures can be perfect teaching times for them to come and be humble and share with them, that we made a mistake, and that repairing process is also teaching them great value in.
We didn't do that early on.
No.
Our view of the Father, our view of authority, I think was so skewed.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't have the humility. Of course, we wanted mercy from God, but we were so performance driven in our own personal relationship with God that our parenting became very performative as well.
And I think even a fear to be seen as weak by your children, that they won't respect you anymore after that. And then how are you going to get obedience?
Right. And so if you're a first-time parent or first-time or a younger parent, some of this might sound crazy. I think it would sound ridiculous to me that we would encourage parents to be vulnerable, to be okay with weakness. But that's how we parent now. Mm-hmm. Because we're so affirmed by the mercy of God, by his mercy in our lives, that we know that we're loved and cherished. And so we know God is so merciful with us that we're able to extend that to our kids as they disobey, as they get emotionally upset or do something really stupid. We're able to be merciful because we're receiving mercy, I think. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that's good. We should end the podcast right there because I think that's the heart of growing into love, becoming love, not just cognitively have these ideas about God and love and like this message, that we're trying to live into, but we're actually experiencing it and giving mercy to ourselves, like you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would move into the area of emotions as they come into this age, and they are expressing a wide range of emotions. And for the first years of parenting, a lot of years of parenting, I was scared of my emotions, wasn't supposed to have them very high or low. And
be stoic.
Yes, be calm, stoic. And so when my kids would display wild emotions, either too happy or upset, I had to do something to calm them down or stop them or convince them to not feel this way.
It felt like that we were parenting inside the home in order to take them out into the world and like showcase, we're a good Christian family. Our kids obey us. We can go to restaurants, and it's not a fiasco. And we're not saying that you just let them fly off the handle. Their emotions are real. They're there for a reason. And do we have the bandwidth and the intentionality to step back and actually get to know them and get to know their emotions and actually talk with them instead of just discipline and get that outward obedience? Let's move to one thing I wrote down here, measured responses, especially in these early years. The looks on our faces as parents, the way we respond in certain situations. I remember one concept of just being careful to measure your response as a mom or a dad by the reaction and the look on their faces. Like, for example, the other day, you guys came back with haircuts. You went to the mall, and Deb and it was Abby and Claire actually came back. And all these years I've remembered, like, there's moments when they're anticipating a response. Maybe they just came back from a tournament or some event and back from summer camp or whatever. They're coming back with this anticipation, and to be the parent, the father and the mother in that moment that stops whatever you're doing. I mean, you may be in the middle of something intense, but to know that there's such a precious moment because they're anticipating. And I want to train that when you have an event in your life, be it happy or sad or devastating or exciting, we're the ones that you can come to and know we're going to be present with you and be excited with you or grieve with you. And that's something that we still work on. But I think that it's something that's always been meaningful to me. And so they came in with streaks in their hair and we're so excited. And and I just rejoiced with them. It may not mean that much to you or to me what they're excited about, but the fact that you're joining with them.
Yes, we all have this longing to be seen and to be known. And when something happens and you enter into a room where a parent is, you are looking for some response. Like, do you see me? Do you know me? We develop these strong attachments to people who light up when they see us.
Right. And that's hard because some of our kids are all over the map. Those of you listening to, maybe you're thinking, oh my goodness, I can't do that because every 3 minutes they're excited about something. And we would say, think about it contextually. It's the difference between them coming in every 5 minutes versus really is a life moment, and just be sensitive to those things. We have one particular kid that, we just can't be totally excited all the time because they're constantly excited about everything.
Yes, and I think that it's also important to look into their eyes, that you can be joyful and excited or opposite, whatever you need to be. But if you're not looking into their eyes, you're missing something, some connection there.
As we work through these ages, because that's a pretty broad spectrum, between a 4-year-old and a 6. And even now we've got an 8 and a 10-year-old, and the maturity levels, what they're interested in, it's always changing. Every 6 months to a year, they are blossoming into their personhood. We heard early on, it's, not whether you enjoy your kids, but other parents enjoy your kids. So that's something I think that we need to hear. Because we're enamored with our kids and we're blind to it.
Yes.
But do other parents run for cover when they see
our kids coming?
Kids come in? And so training them to how to interact with adults early on is so important.
I think that gets back to the moral reason why, that when your kids are interacting with other adults, to see them as these precious souls that God loves.
Yeah, and allowing them to be in the conversation, even with adults, if they're participating and they want to be. Like some of our kids early on, if we'd have home group or things happening, maybe it's not interesting to them. We don't make them stay. But if they are interested, they can and participate. And be a part of like adult conversations.
Yeah, I think we found it important for them to interact with adults and at the same time to not see themselves as the center of attention, that all the world revolved around them.
And we've all been in those scenarios where adults are trying to have conversations and there's some kid, maybe they're 6, whatever, and they're just dominating, distracting. And the parents are so enamored. They think their kids are so special. They don't see what's happening, that kid is dominating. And that the moral reason why, back to why do we avoid that? Why do we teach our kids, train them? It's the preciousness of others. It's that it's not about you. Mm-hmm. Whether you're in the store or you're in your own home playing with another kid, early on in these years, coming out of the toddlers into the 4 to 10-year-old range, we are teaching and training and hopefully embodying the preciousness of others. And they will start to hopefully export that into different contexts. So if they are dominating, if they are interrupting, if they are being selfish, which they will be, mm-hmm. that you're not just disciplining that, but you're building the warehouse mm-hmm. of how to act in all these different situations based on ethics and values, and that other people are valuable.
Yes, and that it's not that they are not important in this moment, but to start widening their picture of community and being aware of what's happening around them and conversations that people are trying to have.
I think that moving out of the West and spending all these years in the East has helped us to appreciate community. And not in the sense that Westerners might use the word community. We're not talking about church. We're talking about relatedness through others. Mm-hmm. So in the West, we're very shaped through hyper individualism. Mm-hmm. And so you are used to coming into a room and thinking about yourself. Am I warm? Am I hungry? Am I first? Where East, it's more of a self-knowledge through relatedness with others. And so obviously communism has a lot of negative connotations, but you think of the word communal, communion, unity, union, and the Trinity being the triune God in relatedness within himself, that there's a way of being known through intimacy, through care, through respect, that I'm not known necessarily because I have the floor and that I'm in the middle, I have the spotlight, but I am known because I'm a part of this. Mm-hmm. And I can enjoy the relationships in this room and not be the center of them.
And I think we're surprised at how young they can become aware of other people and their feelings, and they're learning to read minds and emotions around them.
Mm-hmm. And, I can be a clown and dominate a room as much as anyone. And so kids will pick up on how we interact with others.
I think I would go back to emotions again, because I think I've been shocked at how many of my responses to my kids were actually stemming from something that had nothing to do with the present situation, that I could burst out in anger or say something sharp, maybe because of the current situation, something's happening, but I'm actually responding from something in my past, and it's creating this anxiety inside of me. And so to be aware of what's happening in your own emotional state as you interact with your kids.
As you mentioned that, I'm thinking, what does a young mom or a young dad do to become more self-aware?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the first things we need to do is to pay attention to our bodies, which for so long we've thought of as not important enough, like they're just useful things, they're not spiritual. But actually, this is where our emotions and where the Spirit is working inside of us. And so just to become aware of what we're feeling and where we're feeling it. If there's anxiety and I can feel it, in my gut, or something heaviness in my chest or throat, that these are signs that there's something going on and that our body responds before anything else.
Mm-hmm. I think of early parenting usually means we're very busy. We've got energy, maybe at work. Some of you, men or women, are bringing home a lot of stress. Mm-hmm. And boy, I think of these years, how many times the kids, you're right, they were getting reaction from my day mm-hmm. and not necessarily how I felt about them.
Mm-hmm. Not being in the present moment.
Mm-hmm. So as we get older, we are becoming more aware of who we are, who we're not. And as we get more comfortable in our own skin, we really do become more at ease and able to interact and enjoy these different personalities. But boy, when you're young though, and you don't have many systems down, everything's new. You've never had a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old. And if you have more than one kid, it can really feel so overwhelming. To be encouraged, if you're in your 20s or even 30s, that as you get into your 40s, there really is a transition that starts to take place. And so we're telling you now, it's okay maybe to exit that scenario. Maybe you don't need to train and discipline right in that moment, mm-hmm. that you can step back and go for a walk, or maybe you need a nap or something that just helps you kind of be grounded in the moment before you engage that heart that you love so much. Yeah, that you're participating in forming. So we're not giving a lot of practical advice. We're going philosophical again and getting back to really getting to know yourself. But mm-hmm. there are some practical things. I'm thinking about those special moments. There are these little windows where our kids' hearts really open up. And being aware of that is helpful, to know that maybe it's at night. And Deb does a great job with the girls earlier on, with the boys, tucking them in. And, I'd want my day to be done. I'd be so tired. But there's some times where they just want to talk mm-hmm. and their hearts are open. There are these special moments of bonding and where they open up and they're really willing to trust. Maybe they want to share something that might not seem that big of a deal to you, but it may be something that they'll remember the rest of their life that mm-hmm. they opened up and they were either ignored or be just real fast with a response and not be careful. I go swimming with Claire a few times a week, and it's our little bonding time, and it's just cute. There's these moments where it's just her and I recognize now, after raising all these kids, how fast it goes by, and those moments are precious.
Yes, and I remember hearing this term special time with your kids, where you set aside half an hour, even half an hour a week, just to spend half an hour, even half an hour a week with a child, and how impactful that would be for them, just to have your undivided attention, and how special it would make them feel, and how they would look look forward to that time, and very important for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say also, if you have several children, to be okay with doing something special for one and not feel you have to do it with the others. And our younger girls really like gum. So I'd check out when we were in Ukraine, and it was part of my routine. And sometimes I would just get Claire some gum. And sometimes Abby's favorite chocolate bars. I forget those coconut things.
Bounty.
Oh, they're disgusting. And, Claire would look, kind of go, but they get used to that. Mm-hmm. And early on, if you're never do that, then obviously it looks like you're showing favorites. But, there's times dad or mom does something special for me and does something special for someone else. Again, preciousness mm-hmm. of others.
And learning to rejoice with others when they rejoice.
Right. Sometimes we're so wanting happiness that we parent. If you parent to the happiness, there's no end. It never stops.
No.
So don't do it. Don't even try.
Yes. And I noticed in myself that once I started to get angry and resentful towards my children, I realized that I had been trying for too long to make them happy and not requiring anything of them. No work, no chores. And then I found my attitudes towards them changing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We just had to pause our podcast. We have a 16-year-old son who needed a taxi. He was stranded outside the city in Romania. And we will get to parenting teenagers next week or the week after. So come back for that. We're still learning, but that's a lot of fun. And I think that's the point of these years too, that we are parenting to get to the point where you're not freaking out and have this chaos on your hands, but you have those journeying with you in self-discovery.
Yes, and that's what's so important about these young years is building this relationship step by step, day by day, so that they can trust you when it gets to that relationship part. There's a solid foundation of trust that you do know them, you care about them, and they can open up to you.
They're okay being stranded outside the city gates. Who are they with? What are they doing? Like as a parent, don't dread the teenage years. They are some of the best years. They really have been. Not because we've been amazing parents, but because we valued having a relationship with them. By the time we get there, that our parenting doesn't start then. Okay, now we need a bunch of rules, but that we have been giving them freedoms. They've been failing and learning, and
we've been failing and
along
learning
together. Absolutely. And by the time they get there, you're equals. There's this idea in leadership theory is so important that as we move through life, when we're younger, those that influence us are those in places of authority. They have roles. So mom and dad and teacher and policeman, policewoman, doctor, these roles elicit a respect and a submission. But as we get older, that moves to relationships. And we look for those that are equals, those that are colleagues, in our 20s and our 30s. It moves from roles. We're not looking to roles anymore. We're wanting to grow. We're wanting to be inspired. And we do that within relationship. And then the third stage, for those of us that are believers, we are looking for those that embody Christ, that really reflect him in ways that inspire. I share that because as a parent, we can put on this role as mom and dad, and we think that's always our go-to card. That when we want a certain action or reaction, especially in these younger years, yes, you are the mom, you are the dad, but there's a day coming when you will exchange that card for equal relationship, someone that's also growing and learning. So you want to sow those seeds early, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yes, and I think you mentioned last time about Jesus calling us friends and moving to that stage. And it doesn't mean that you are at the same point in your journey. It just means that you see each other as equals.
In the grand scheme of the universe, in the brief moment that we take up oxygen together in these physical material life forms, there's a small season where they are incomplete, incompetent. They need you for sustenance, for protection, for all of these things, for training and learning. But it's going to go by so quickly, and they will be, hopefully, someone